Join me today to welcome the incredible, the extraordinary Mark Sainsbury. Today we're talking all things men's health. And this will be informative, it will be uplifting because of course it is Groov, and sometimes it may be confronting. We'll talk stats, challenges and solutions. This is a topic close to my heart, both professionally as someone whose job it is to motivate health behaviour so people can live longer, healthier and happier lives. And as a daughter whose father had a health complaint, a father who did not seek help even though he had a visible growth protruding from his abdomen, who was so fatigued he couldn't walk up his driveway, and his voice, which was his livelihood, was being affected. And the delay in seeking treatment led to his premature death. So with that background, I'd like to properly introduce Mark Sainsbury. Mark is one of the country's most experienced journalists, a former news reporter, a political editor, a foreign correspondent, and he's hosted Close Up, the country's most popular nightly current affairs show. Mark has been a radio talkback host and in-demand after-dinner speaker and conference facilitator. Mark has been part of Men's Health Week for a number of years, and he is passionate about men getting the best chance in life, starting with them taking the first steps. He has a particular concern regarding mental health, which affects every family in the country. Thank you for joining me, Mark. Off air, but before we were talking, I also have a family in radio. We were just talking about how you got into men's health. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into why you're here before us today? And what is Men's Health Week?
Well, I hadn't heard of Men's Health Week. I didn't know anything about it. A friend of mine, Tim Green, who's the co-director of Men's Health Week with me now, was working for an Australian outfit who were running it. And basically, it's an awareness campaign. Once a year for 1 week, and it's locked in always in June. And this is because when it was first started in the States, it was linked into the North American Father's Day date. So that's where the timing came from. So what they used to do was run this campaign every year. And the basic thing is to try and stop men dying of preventable death. And that's things like heart disease, diabetes, suicide. Men do not need to die of those things. We're all going to die. Unfortunately, we cannot stop that, but we don't have to die so soon. And the general feeling was that men were pretty crap about looking after themselves. So this campaign started, as I said, it's run in many, many countries. We do it a bit differently here, and I can come to that in a bit, but I was approached to be an ambassador. The people who are running it, the Master Builders are the main sponsor. The Master Builders are fantastic. They've been involved in this since day one. 12 years it's been going in New Zealand. So basically they were clipping the ticket, running the campaign, then they got bored of it, didn't want to do it. So we thought this is really important. You know, the more time I'd spent in it, the more I realized that how important it was. So we took it over and we run this. The difference is around the world, say in the States, even in Australia, a lot of it's tied to research. They'll spend that week, they might fundraise, they might do testing of men clinics, but a lot of it is also around research into men's health. In New Zealand, and I think we're more successful than anywhere else in the world in terms of how we pitch the campaign. We're an awareness campaign. Now, we do not rattle the tin. We do not ask for money. All we want is your attention. And so we get out there and it's just a reminder to guys, those small steps. Now, when you're looking after yourself, you know, it doesn't have to be confronting. You can just start by making small steps in life, eating better, exercise. Also, there's all sorts of things, and looking after your mental health, which you know so well, Fiona. So what we have to, how that long way round to it, I then got roped in. We ended up taking it over and we've sort of kept it going. We've managed to keep it going through COVID. Look, the Master Builders are fantastic. We'd really like to upscale it. And we'll have to sort of look at doing that and sort of, you know, increasing the whole sponsorship level. But it's run literally by the two of us, but huge goodwill around the country, including like from yourselves. And one of the things about that we have noted over the years is it used to be, especially in areas of health, you'd have the prostate, you'd have heart, and all these different people doing their campaigns, and everyone, yeah, this is our little space, keep away. We take a more collaborative approach, and that's like, we like hooking up with people like Groov and like the Heart Foundation, like the Prostate Cancer Foundation, so, because we're all after the same goal, so let's all work together.
Beautiful. And the truth is that I think there may be some reasons why New Zealand and Australia and literally around the world, men's health lags behind women's, doesn't it? And we're talking preventable death here, or preventable illness even. So in your experience, Mark, and I can talk about my experience too, what are you seeing? What do you think drives the fact that our stats in New Zealand, let's just deal with New Zealand, for men's health are not where we want them to be? We know that we've got some issues in Māori health and Pacifica health, which in terms of longevity, we know that the stats actually say that Māori men their longevity is 7 years less than someone who is other non-Māori men. So obviously there are some issues here that we have to confront as a nation. What do you think is driving some of those stats?
I think there's all sorts of, access to healthcare, just basic sort of right from the start where healthcare, looking after yourself, fits into your daily routines. We got absolutely shocked because we started looking at the figures and breaking them down, and we've worked out that 49%. So when you look at the last the 22 figures, deaths in the country, 49% of Māori deaths were before the age of 65. So in other words, if you're Māori, half of you are not going to get the pension. You'll die before then. Now, some people die as infants, and that's looking at right across that. You look at Pacifica, I think it is 43%. For European Pākehā New Zealand, it is 24%. So something is wrong here. How is it that one sector of the population has twice the death rate of the other? And then people go, look, it's diet, or it's this, or it's that. It doesn't matter what it is. It's something that needs to be addressed. And this is something the Otago Centre for Men's Health we spent a bit of time with as well, and we're looking at having something later this year to try and address some of those issues. But I think, and if you travel around the country, you'll see this, just the difference in access to healthcare. I was doing a radio interview the other day, and the host could not get a doctor.
Yeah.
He could not get enrolled with a doctor. Now, this was to be absolutely crude about it, a white, privileged, older male who had everything going for him and access to everything. He couldn't even get onto the list to get a GP. Now, you imagine then if you are in less advantaged circumstances and you're somewhere rural, further north, no access to medicine. So all those sort of things just start to multiply. Your diet's affected, your health's affected, you're not dealing with things as you come through. We just keep pushing this thing to the side and not looking at it. And I think we have to, sooner or later, we're going to have to stand up and sort of say, look, we have a major problem. It's an inequality problem here, and we have to address it.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really important thing if we're thinking about what we can do about it. It's one thing to say it just is. Actually, there are some situations I think that we could focus on. One is even the messaging around food. The idea, we know that men's health, generally, there's some ideas around what is manly. So there's that, traditionally, there's this idea that I think about my dad. As I said, he had his health complaint, died prematurely. He died at 72 and shouldn't have, but was hiding his health condition. And he would call salad rabbit food. So we know that there is a little bit about that. He did smoke. He was, of his generation, but also he didn't think of going to the doctor. My mother was a great going to the doctor person. So there's some things around attitudes that we know that we have to shift, and also access to food. I know that right now there are a lot of things on TikTok and social media around the way that we should eat. But actually, if it's cheaper to have a feed at McDonald's than it is to go and prepare a salad, they might be both very quick, but they cost basically a disproportionate amount of money. That is something that we have to think about. And then we think about what we think of as the kind of food that we want to eat as men generally, particularly men. As I said to you before, Mark, we work a lot in the construction industry. People are doing high labouring, intensive work that's very physical, and probably eating a little egg and cress sandwich is not the way to go, because they want to eat something that actually gives them fuel. So how do we change some of the attitudes around food if we can't address the idea of money right now, which I think is tricky? Maybe you and I can't do that, but how do we change attitude towards food, do you think?
Food is a really tough one, and especially in that construction area. You just sort of think construction workers and pies and different things. I think generally, I think age is going to change it. As the baby boomers die off, people like me sort of disappear. I think the generations coming through are a lot more attuned to their bodies and their health than certainly we were. And it's funny when you're talking about your father, because I think of my father-in-law. Now, he was Samoan, big, strong guy, worked on the wharves. Now, he was in incredible pain with his hip, and he'd go to the doctor and would say, Ray, you're telling the doctor what's going on. And he'd say, oh, yeah, but the doctor would say, how much pain are you in 1 to 10? Oh, 5. Now, he'd be 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And that whole staunchness, you don't own up. In the end, we just got cross with it. And back in those days, it was sort of, I was making a lot of money. I said, I booked him in for a private hospital. I said, you're not going to spend the rest of your years like that. And as it turned out, he then developed cancer. He didn't have long. But it was the fact that, oh, no, I'm okay, or someone else deserves it ahead of me, and all that sort of stuff, So that's in that attitude to the health system. The food thing is very basic. It does come down, and it's healthy choices. And yeah, we're not going to go and get mung beans or tofu. I once stage thought Jeremy Wells and I were going to take a tofu wagon down to a building site and see how it went. But slowly, I think people are coming around to it, and that's where the attitude we take is, you can't get in there with a club and go, you horrible people eating all your bad food, don't you realize? That never works. You have to try and persuade people, and it's role modeling and putting in people who they're going to listen to. So that's why we base a lot of our system on our ambassadors and people who we think that, the various communities are going to react to. So we had, Sumo, Scotty Stevenson, the commentator, he's been involved this year. Scotty Morrison, the Te Reo King, that's the other thing, is trying to get the messaging through. I still think a lot of it does come down to, it's what we focus on, individual, your mates. If your mate says, what are you eating that for? Whatever, or little things like that make a difference. None of us like being lectured. None of us like being told what to do and what we should eat. So that's been the whole basis of our campaign. Small steps, cajoling people into things. And I think the food thing, I despair a bit about the food thing, though. You look at sport. What on earth are we doing having KFC sponsoring the Super Rugby in this country? That's where a lot of the messaging is wrong as well.
I know, and food is such an emotional thing, I think. Doing some work, I did some work early on in my health psychology career in the area of diabetes. And one of the things I'll say is that food is very tricky, because food for many people is comfort, it is fun, it is community. And sometimes we're talking and asking people to change the way they do things in a way that we don't understand what that food means for them. So I think it's really important to understand, you're right. Messaging is important, and role modeling is actually, I do believe, the key. If it was as simple as to tell people, here, have 5+ a day, make sure that you're doing your health screening, get some good sleep, make sure you rest. How many people do that stuff? I would be out of a job. That is not how we operate. Telling people what they need to do. People know what they need to do often, but there's a whole lot of factors that actually are dependent on whether or not they're going to do that. And so for some people, it will be, this is my comfort, I love it, and my life feels a bit rubbish right now, so actually why food is my comfort, and you're telling me not to do one thing that is comfortable to me. The other is, my peers are really important to me. I don't want to be seen as different than, so I'll go and we'll eat food, and this is rabbit food is not seen as manly, because we do have this idea about food being masculine. We've got masculine and feminine women, we have that as well, but masculine foods, which is really odd to me, but I've been looking at the stats around that and what that is in terms of often, it's okay for my wife or my girlfriend or my daughter to eat this way, but get stuck into a sausage sun. There's that. And then there's the idea really that if we talk about health too, that in itself is a bit, it's not manly. I don't talk about how I feel, because actually the way I do feel is what you just described with your father-in-law. He said he was on a scale of 1 to 10, he was a 5, but you knew he was probably an 8 or a 9. But we have this idea that talking about pain or health in itself is actually something that is not the way that you would imagine being masculine is. So that's something that we have to change. So role modeling, you think role modeling might be the idea there, that might change it?
I'm fascinated, though, by what you're saying about the manly foods, because when you think about it anecdotally, you sort of see it even, we're growing up and, the boys were always given the bigger portions, you need this and you need that. Is that, where do you think that comes from? Is that back even to sort of hunter-gatherer sort of?
Yes, I do. And I think portion size is another thing that's seen, a man-sized portion is something that we talk about. And so, it's ladies are delicate and eat little bits and men eat big meals. I grew up in rural Hawke's Bay. I can remember that narrative around. And so therefore, it's not even what you're eating, it's the size of the portions. And you will see that, yes, I do think that there was this idea, and I think it probably had something to do with the fact that traditionally, men were going out doing very physical work and women perhaps were not doing so much physical work. Obviously, that is no longer the case. We see a lot of things that are no longer like that. But yes, I do think that that's probably where it came from. And there may be some good basis for eating as though you were doing heavy laboring work. But unfortunately, the quality of food that we have now may not be. It's high fat. It's not actually serving that. And also it's cheaper. So that's something we have to address in society, and often it's really delicious because it's full of fat and salt, and we know that is delicious. Whereas I think women are sold a different image, right? You're supposed to be thin, you're supposed to be caring for your health. It is feminine to be actually looking and watching what you eat, and that causes a whole lot of other issues.
Yeah.
So I think really what we have to start doing is let's just start to be real. How do we start to change some of these attitudes? And what you said about us oldies dying out, I think that's probably part of it. Some of those attitudes hopefully will go. But then it's the how do we get men to talk about their health with each other? Now, do you have conversations with your mates around, your prostate or your general energy? Do you have those conversations?
Look, occasionally we do, but mainly because I suppose we've been involved in this. But things like I've got a son who's a type 1 diabetic, so we've always had that sort of issue going on. And just on the portion control, it's such an effective. I lost 15 kgs over a couple of years. I didn't even know, but that was mainly I suddenly started having a look at how much I was eating, and it's a very difficult thing, but just gradually, so I just started reducing the amount I was eating, you didn't want to get, I still like, and cut back on alcohol. Now, I still like going out. I still like drinking. I've occasions and things like that, but just gradually cut it back. And I was on blood pressure medication, you see, and I was on metformin for type 2 diabetes. And over a couple of years, I'm not trying to say this is a herogram because it wasn't. It took a long time and just did it slowly. It made a huge difference, but you felt so much better, And when you get those results, when your clothes start being a bit loose and all that sort of stuff, that's what encourages you, but you can't always be in that situation. I was sort of, I was sort of quite lucky and sort of had COVID to practice with it. But it is those, how do you sort of change the mindset in the discussions? Although we've probably talked more about health now with my friends than we ever did in the past, and certainly more than my parents ever did. I think it is changing. And I think the generations coming through below me are even, don't have those same sort of classes. It's a bit bloody girly to be talking about your feelings, all that sort of nonsense. You can see this. So I think that, we're becoming better at it. And again, part of our campaign is to talk to your mates, have those conversations. And part of the importance, and especially from Groov, is having someone to talk to is such an important factor for our health.
Absolutely. And we know that a lot of the stats are about not early intervention. So if you are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes early, then you can do some stuff. But to be diagnosed, you have to be having checkups, right? You have to be doing those things. And if checkups are not part of the way that you do things. So I think that there are a lot of people who are listening in today, and they will be part of businesses. So how do businesses start changing it? I think there are a lot of men on this call. I think honestly, it's changing the dialogue. We talk a lot at Groov about that. How do we start having these conversations about physical health and mental health? Because it's all very related. So normalizing screening behavior, the whole idea of prostate screening is a really important one, and bowel cancer screening. And we know that there are things that stop us doing that. One is we don't like doing it because if you're someone who is a little bit frightened of health, then we actually see from the research that men tend to be more fearful than women. And, women obviously are medicalized from, if you've had babies and you've done stuff, you're in the medical system a little bit, whereas men may not have had that kind of relationship. So I know that with my dad, it was fear. He knew he had this big lump protruding from his belly, but he didn't do anything about it because he was scared it might be something. Yeah. And the research shows that fear is one of those drivers. And the other, don't screen, because then I'd know, and then I'd have to do something about it. That resonates with you, Mark?
Yeah, it's that logic, isn't it? It's a bit like, I'm of the generation with the murder house. We hated the dentist. We used to go and have our teeth drilled without anesthetic. It was just barbaric when you think about it. But it put me off. It was a lifetime. It put you off going to the dentist. There's no good comes of that. Whereas in actual fact, it's the same as the doctor, not going and not being told that you might have something. Prostate is such a classic example, isn't it? Most of us, most men, will die with prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. Not of it. We'll die with it. It can be treated and managed if you do the checks and you tackle it early. So it's so counterintuitive. If I ignore this problem, it'll go away. No, it won't go away. And in fact, if you don't ignore it, you might be able to make it go away because you can get onto it early. But we have this fear, and it's just so insane, isn't it? If I don't find out that something is bad, it will not affect me.
Yep. Yeah, I am that avoidant coper, so I understand it because I'm the person who doesn't want. In my household, it's the opposite. My husband goes every year, and I'm like, I never go see a doctor. Partly to do with physician heal thyself. If you're in this field, you often don't do the things that you should do. So this is a reminder to me as well. The other thing I wanted to talk about really was parenting young boys, right? One of the things that we know is that men disproportionately die from self-harm or accidents, or even acts of violence. They're often the victims of violence because it's male-on-male violence. We know that the prefrontal cortex does not fully form till 25. So impulse control, particularly in young men, is a bit more difficult. So they're taking risks. Generally, women also take risks, but on the whole, young men take more risks. They're not seeing the consequences of their action. So one of the things we see, you're more likely, if you're a young male, to die in a car accident than a female. You're more likely to be the victim of violence, and you're also more likely to self-harm in a catastrophic way. So knowing all of those things, understanding that as a parent, we would encourage you, one of the things that we would say at Groov is having conversations with kids early so that they can name and talk about their emotions. Because, Mark, that is something our generation was not good at, right?
No. I'm finding, though, the difference. See, my son has had issues over the years with depression and anxiety, and these were things that I remember when he sort of, just suddenly lost it one day, and that horrible feeling as a parent. Oh, we didn't know this was going on, and why didn't we know, and all that sort of stuff. It's the barrier, I suppose, in reflecting back on it for him, is that I think he was sort of quite happy to share. I don't think he necessarily found us as receptive as we probably could have been. Not deliberately, but we just weren't. We needed to tune in. So you've got to be really, really aware of it. So his generation was more disposed towards talking to us about it. It's about us being in the position that we recognize it and then have the tools to be able to, help them with it.
I think that's a really good point. I do think this generation, partly, some of the good sides of social media is that people can find their tribe. So if they are experiencing anxiety, they're a young boy who's living in an isolated community and is gay, that they can find their tribe so that they can get and feel supported, and it normalizes some of the conversations that we are learning to have our kids had earlier. So that is actually a really bright spot. The idea that we do talk about mental health. One of the things I do say about why we talk about naming your emotions, and we know that men, I live with an engineer, I've been married for 30 years, and most people on this call have probably heard me say he doesn't talk much, and if I do say how he feels, he's always fine. And I try and show him the science that if you want to actually process your emotions so they don't sit in the amygdala and the fight or flight response, you have to say how you feel. And it's really tough, I think, for many men to say how they feel, because in our generation, and probably the generation even in between, it was okay if you were women to talk, or young girls to talk about how you felt. You were even possibly asked. I don't think my brother was very much asked about how he felt. how did he have the conversation, the vocab to be able to say how he feels? So as parents, we have to give kids space to say how they feel and know that it's actually a good thing. I remember thinking with my kids, I wish they didn't tell me so much. I'd rather that they didn't. You kind of have to put your face into an impassive face and go, oh, I wish I didn't know that. But it's actually a really healthy thing. And if we can do it with our younger kids to say, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm upset, I'm worried, we know that that really helps. Do you think that we are seeing that shift? What do we do? Okay, so our younger men may be getting, that's a good thing. What about our older men? How do we start those conversations where they can start to talk about how they feel?
Well, it depends, I suppose, who they start with. I mean, that's why that sort of peer group thing, I think, is good. Is you've got people of your own age and your own friends, and you encourage, check on your mates. You don't have to try and cure them, but check on them. Make sure they're right. Do that sort of stuff. So I think that sort of peer-to-peer way is probably the best way for us to go. I'm just still fascinated, though, Fiona, that you, with all your fantastic qualifications, can't get your husband to open up as much as he should be.
Oh, yeah. 30 years, mate. No, he's but he is a very, very calm person, and he seems pretty well adjusted, but he does have me. No, he doesn't have the vocab for it. But I do think we had our best man who came up from the Wairarapa this weekend, and I did hear them talk, and I did think it was really beautiful. It was a very kind of male conversation. They didn't talk about how they felt, but they talk about stuff. But yeah, I agree. It's a mystery. I can get most people to open up, Mark. I'm pretty good at it, but it's a generational thing, and I think his dad is the same. And in the end, what I do is I look for the signs of this, and the signs of he's just even a little bit quieter than usual. I will start breaking him down to have those conversations. The other thing that we do sometimes is I've got a program where he writes good things about me. If he can't tell me good things about himself, he can tell me good things about me, starting to get that vocabulary around feelings and love and stuff. But yeah, I think that our generation, it's a challenge. So in terms of, have you seen a change, Mark, with your friends in terms of this? Do you talk about how you're feeling more than you used to? Are you talking?
I think so, yeah. And I tell you what really has been, I suppose, has been confronting is the whole, and mental health and that, the sharp end of that, the suicide rates in this country. And there's probably not a family in the country that hasn't been touched in some way by that. And that's sort of suddenly confronting and it's unfortunate that it takes that. But I think there's no getting around it with all of us. I mean, both Timmy and myself, we have friends or relatives or whatever, they're all, and you look at this and you think, this is not right. So I think even the hardened old baby boomers are sort of starting to, seeing what a conversation has to be had, and sort of drag kicking and screaming. You see that right through society with all sorts of things and attitudes toward things, and as they sort of changing over the years. And I think if you look at attitudes to Maori and Maori tanga in New Zealand society, there's a big difference between the older age group and the younger age group who are far more open to it. So I think, yes, I think change is happening. I think we are just starting to talk more, and I think we're confronted more. And the other thing is, we know more about sort of things happening. Things aren't sort of just swept away, sort of a farmer died in Waipakaro and da-da-da. Well, it was a suicide, but things were never mentioned. It would be an accident. I think we're more aware of it, and we're confronted more by it these days. And it forced us to sort of sit back and have a look at it and ask ourselves. And plus the shared personal experience. And I think in the past, a lot of people wouldn't have shared much if you lost someone in your family. It's not something you probably would have shared with many other people, because often back then it was a sort of shame or things. I think it's totally different now. And I think, it's certainly not perfect, but I think it has dramatically improved.
I think that stigma thing is a really important one. And as we move to understand a little bit more about health generally, is understanding that when we stand in a room and share our stories, there will be a number of people who have similar experiences. And I think the secret to changing some of these statistics are doing what you're doing, Mark, which is going out and having the conversation and being vulnerable. So for those of you who are on the call who are men, who are in organizations that you're worried about others, we know that sharing your story is helpful. Also, if you are doing the screening, health screening, which is one of my big things, please do the health screening. Again, I'm not always good at it myself, so I'm taking note, but normalize it by saying what you're doing. Because actually, when we see the people that we respect starting to do those things, we see a shift. And we're seeing it in construction with older men saying, yeah, I'm off to get my prostate checked. I'm going to do the health check, or I'm going to talk to somebody because right now I'm struggling. And what it does is it sets the tone for everyone else in the org. You might not be able to force someone to take the screening test around prostate or go and get their annual check, but you can change their attitudes to what's normal. So thinking and talking about it is how we make the change, I think. I think it's about the way that you're doing it, Mark. You're going around New Zealand right now and having these conversations. In terms of your own health, what do you do?
Well, I've just had my hip replaced before Christmas. Boy, did that make a difference. And then that's just another nightmare story. Don't get me on the New Zealand public health system. But in the end, I came through massive difference. One thing it did teach me, though, I suddenly realized how much pain I'd been in and how grumpy it had been making me. And I had no idea, you know. My wife's going, oh, what's wrong with you? I'm going, what's wrong with me? You know? And you think of all these people carrying conditions which are affecting their mental state. Look, there's just something I wanted to pick up on you mentioned before, which is a key word for us. You talk about vulnerability, and that's one of the things that we find with our ambassadors as well, is that, you know, that they can sort of open up to people. You can sort of see their vulnerability and people then react to that, you know. So you see, well, someone's talking about Matt Chisholm, who I used to work with and you know, did Celebrity Treasure Island, he's been doing a lot of stuff in the rural area, getting out there and talking to farmers. But he's a farmer himself. And again, so people relate to him. You know, they don't necessarily relate to him as the host of Celebrity Treasure Island, but they relate to him as someone they know is down on the farm. And that's the same thing. And if we see people, if people are willing to sort of expose their own vulnerability, it makes it a bit easier for us to accept it as well.
Agree.
It's a thing to do at times.
I think, and that comes back to the stigma and the idea of health problems being a weakness rather than just part of the frailties of human beings. You know, we are not machines. We have to have hips replaced. We're living longer, and these things happen. But somehow there's something about the idea that if you admit it, you talk about it, that somehow you're taking away a bit of you. And so that's what we have to change. Because I do think there's definitely that idea, that stoic New Zealand and Australian male, which is you're supposed to just suck it up and be good and don't complain, and all of that stuff is bad for your mental health, but it's also really bad for your physical health, because if physical health conditions are seen as a vulnerability or a shame, or there's shame connected, and diabetes, often there's so much shame, you know, the idea. One of the things when I was going around the country talking to doctors about how you get people to be adherent to insulin, because we know that people don't like taking insulin because insulin feels like a failure. It feels like I did something wrong, when often it's just the trajectory of the disease. And when you want to get someone to be adherent to something that they need to keep them alive and they're not being adherent, you have to understand what the barriers are. And often the barriers were shame and stigma. They didn't want to talk about it, and it's such an obvious thing. If you have to leave work and you have to shoot up, you have to inject insulin. And so then to get people to do the stuff that you want them to do is understand what their why is. And so in the end, if you explain to people, and generally these were men, that you want to be around for your kids, it's not about you anymore. It's about the people that you love. And I feel like if we shift the conversation around men's health to be the thing, their why, and often their why are the people they love. They'll look at themselves and go, I can handle all of this, but they would be standing in front of a bus for their kids or their parents, the people that they love. Is that something you've seen?
No, it's exactly how we've been pitching this campaign. And part of it has been, if you don't do it for yourselves, do it for the ones who love you. You do it for your kids, do it for your wife or your partner or whatever. So it's not just about you, because what affects you is going to affect so many other people. You know, your good health is the greatest gift you can give to your family, you know. And you're right, there's still this thing, though. I can say I've just had a hip replacement and it was terrible, and anyone go, oh, that's great, whatever. If I said I've had a mental breakdown before Christmas and I had to take some time out and sort of seek help, and I'm really good now. Mental illness is just another illness.
Yeah.
It's another condition, but slowly. I mean, it's a big difference now, Fiona, I think, than say what it was 20 or 30 years ago. I think it is moving in the right direction, but there is still a lot of that stigma around it, and especially for guys, to own it. And again, I come back to what you were talking about before. Are you expressing weakness, and therefore, keep talking.
Yeah.
And one of the things I suppose that I fear them, and I think it's a real epidemic in this country, is loneliness. You imagine, I mean, you've got the husband, family, same with it, was surrounded by people and friends. To have no one you can seek out, I think is just it tears me up,
That's a really good point, because when you look at some of the predictors of poor mental health outcomes for men, women, it's for everyone, but loneliness is one of the biggest predictors of poor longevity. And so, and with women, they tend to know how to, well, not every woman, I'm making lots of generalizations here, but it tends to be the case that even in a group of strangers, you can probably find someone that you can chat to and just talk, because talking helps. There is something about that walking and talking. We know from a neuroscience point of view, it actually really does help. We know that micro connections, the idea of going and walking your dog and smiling at people as you walk past, actually feeds oxytocin and serotonin. But often I think when you're feeling isolated, particularly if you're a bloke, so there's that idea of how you are in the world, going out for a walk and then smiling at everyone. I think there's an added layer of, what will they think I'm hitting on them? Will I be a bit creepy? There's a whole lot of narratives in a bloke's brain. And so missing out on micro connections and then being isolated and then not knowing how to talk. So what I would say is writing stuff down actually can be really helpful. If you are feeling isolated, and sometimes it is really hard to broach things with even your women friends, we know from neuroscience too that just writing it down, going, I'm feeling really crap right now, being able to put and write stuff down in a journal, which again is not traditionally what we know men do, but actually really helpful. So that's something you can do if you're finding it really hard to talk to somebody, writing it down, some of the same things.
I'm writing that down as we speak, because I think that's fantastic advice. That's really, really interesting. That's really interesting. You see, our sort of main thrust, what we try and do, we have a tool on our website called What's Your Score? And that just asks basic questions. Have you had your skin checked? Have you had cholesterol? All those sort of tick boxes. What have you done this in the last year? And it's just like a check sheet for me. And it's not trying to say you're hopeless because you didn't do it, but it's just trying to give you an idea where you're at. And it's the prompt. So you think, oh yeah, I actually haven't had a skin check. I should go and get that done. I should get this done. All the various things. So you go through, and that'll give you a number. And the idea is to try and then get guys to do it. And they can compete with each other and see what these are, But then it says, okay, you're doing really good, so to keep it up. Or there's a bit of improvement here. Or look, you may need to look at doing some stuff, and a visit to the doctor wouldn't do you any harm. So that's our major. And again, it's just we're just trying to cajole men into doing stuff, Have a list, check on that. See, this is on menshealthweek.co.nz, and you just go on to that, and then you can sort of get just a general idea where you're at, and just say we're not clinicians, we're not diagnosing anyone, but there are basic things that you can adjust. It's a checklist of, what have you done lately, And it also asks questions like, do you have someone you can talk to, which, as we've both been saying, is so important, So that's part of the thing, is just trying to push guys into doing that sort of self-assessment, just because it'll sit there and it might come up as a reminder later. Oh yeah, I haven't done a prostate blood test, and because it doesn't have to be the old. Everyone gets all wound up about the digital rectal examination and all that sort of nonsense, and it doesn't have to. The PSA testing is pretty damn efficient,
Yeah, and I think that's it. That's kind of one of the barriers, is what we would call health literacy. I hate that. It feels like you can't read or something. It just means that we don't understand. So it feels it feels like if I'm going to go to the doctor, I'm going to be asked to do all of these things. It's going to take another day of work, because we've got to say going to the doctor, the way that we, and we don't cater. Often doctors aren't open in the weekend. People are working long hours. So I will say that you can now do telehealth. Telehealth is really good. I know that my kids, different generation, I don't love it. They don't go and see a GP. Their GP is online, but it means that they can whip away and they don't even have to get in a car. It really is very simple.
What do you think about that, the online consultations? Because
I think it's, okay. I've got lots of thoughts about it. I think that there are some pluses if you're going to, it means that you're going to see somebody and otherwise you wouldn't, which I do think that there are things that are missed when you're not they're not taking your blood pressure, for instance, they're not doing those things. I think that it's much more preferable to go in and definitely see someone. But if it means that you're going to see somebody, then I think it's certainly for younger ones, it's sort of a way into getting into that habit of seeing somebody. And over COVID, I think things changed a little bit about the idea of testing and doing things. I think we've got a little bit better at understanding, vaccinations and things that we should be doing started to become more salient in people's memories and minds. And also, I think the conversation around anxiety, a lot of people are worried about their kids, for instance, and then they're starting to think about themselves. So I love that you're out there right now, because I think the opportunity is it's a hot opportunity. It's that thinking that, we're not invulnerable to things happening. We saw a lot of very healthy people get quite sick. So we've got to start changing our mindset around this, understanding that there are things that we can do proactively. And it's really hard because the human brain doesn't work very well with preventive. We are not wired to stop stuff happening unless you're very health anxious. So it's why if we're thinking about smoking when we're 20, the idea that we might get cancer at 60 doesn't really stop us.
Right.
We're not very good at projecting into the future. So preventive stuff is really hard. It's like, I'll do that next year. I'll do it the year later because I've got no symptoms. Why would I do that? So that's why I think normalizing it in the workplace, having those conversations where you say, I do this, or here's my score. And that's why I would do it, because scores are a good idea, because we want to improve our scores. That starts to change the dialogue, because the truth is preventive stuff is hard, because if you're not treating something in the immediate thing that you can see, it's hard to get people there, right?
Yeah. I think we've also seen this massive change in terms of business operators and companies. And you see this because, you're who they go to. They are taking their obligations and their duties to their employees much more seriously. I hope it's based on goodwill and not just on threats of legal action. But you ever look at companies, and we deal with a lot. People ring up and say, look, we want some material for our workers. We want to do something. We want to help, which they never would have involved themselves in the past. And I think also, especially around their sort of mental health space, that, companies are seeking out, like with Groov, they're seeking out, professional advice on how to deal with it. And it means that they're taking it seriously. And I think that's a big change as well.
Yeah, big shout out to Girl Trap, who actually have, they get people to go to the doctor. I love that it's sort of one of the things that they're expecting them to do, people that work. And there are many organizations doing that now. The idea really is preventive health is good for organizations. People being unwell is not a great thing. So, starting with vaccinations or encouraging screening tests when people reach the threshold is a good idea for businesses generally. And also, I just think changing the dialogue around health in terms of understanding that preventive health is where we want to be. That if we want to have a thriving society, then we should be doing things that doesn't undermine us being able to thrive. And so that a lot of those counterproductive health behaviors, which are around things like depression, when we are depressed and sad, we don't eat so well, we don't sleep so well, it's sort of this cycle. So if we can start to go, what do we want for our kids? What do we want for the people around us? And in effect, if you could be the role model, even if it's not for you, for them, it's like, I want to role model this for my kids, going to the doctor regularly. If you are in a family where there are men or women who are not going to the doctor and you want them to, you know what, do it together. Go to the doctor as a family, do your annual checkups. How I got Dad to the doctor in the end was I made the appointment. I mean, there's something wrong, Dad. And I made the appointment. I wish I'd done it earlier. And he was kind of, by that point, he was like, oh, and I drove him. And so there is sometimes that I know that there are often those men that different generation going, oh, you're not telling me I'm going to the doctor. But I just basically put my foot down and said, for my peace of mind, Dad, I am taking you to the doctor. So sometimes we have to do that.
Yeah, but you see, isn't it just such a classic example? Here he is physically presenting with something. You know, I mean, we've all been there. It's like having a toothache. I mean, it's a different level, of course, but you know something is wrong. You know something is wrong. You can't avoid that, but you just think, oh, if I just ignore it, you know.
Absolutely. So Charlie says, how do you deal with negative people and how not to let their negativity affect your mindset? Do you want to tackle that one, Mark?
No, I'd rather you tackle that one.
Oh, do you? So what I would say is, there will be people who are wired negatively. We call it high and negative affect. You have got friends who always see something wrong, that the glass is half empty. Yep. And the truth is that they are sometimes just wired that way. And from my perspective as in health psychology, great to do research with people high in negative affect because they're high symptom reporters. They'll often tell me how terrible the world is. And I can do placebo research on them. I really like those people. But in the end, though, I do this. I override their negativity by changing the narrative in my head, by doing the 3 good thing, where I go, actually, what's the truth here? What do I think? And what are the good things that are happening right now? And I know that negativity is contagious, but so is positivity. And as a placebo and nocebo researcher, I can tell you that how we think, the expectations we set have a huge impact on our physical and mental health. So if you are dealing with someone who's being negative about their health, I'm not sure the context, but if they're being negative about their health or they're being negative about the world, the truth is that is them. That is okay. Maybe they're wired that way. You might not get them to change their mind, but you are you. So you can go, is this true? Is this a truth? Doesn't seem like it's a truth to me. And then focus on the good things yourself. I know it's hard. I had a mother who had a very negative mindset and would always complain about everything, including her health, the opposite of my dad. And in the end, it was like, that's just her. It's not right. Like they were both the opposite extremes of each other. And in the end, the truth was in the middle.
Does that mean you give up on them, though?
Do you give up? No. Well, it depends on who they are. No, you don't give up on them, but you just don't let it impact how you see the world. So it's a bit like going, I've got this friend who sees it this way, but that's how they see it. If they're impacting your health and your mentality and they're not great friends, then yeah, you don't have to spend time with people who are undermining how you feel. But actually what you can say is that is you and I am here. And if you're still someone I want in my life, that's okay, but I'm not going to be impacted by what you say if it is not true. So it's a bit like letting people be who they are. It's different if they're actively being malicious, but if it's just a negativity, it's annoying. But, it's just one of those things where you can just reframe it in your mind. And if you're finding it impacts you, then you start to do things that top you up. You go, right, after I spent time with that person, if it's a parent, then you spend half an hour doing something like
That's more about protecting yourself then, isn't it? I mean, but if you get people that sort of have that negativity, because you always think, I still would like to try and bring them round. But what you're saying is what you don't want to do is allow them to bring you down with them.
Yeah.
That's the first thing to maintain.
Yeah. That's exactly right. It's like, how do you not let them impact you? And yeah, you can jolly them out of it. You can try, but some people you won't. And then it's only a problem if it's impacting your mental well-being. So then you just double down on the stuff that makes you see the world positively. Jason says, are bowel prostate screening something men at any age can request with their GP or do you have to be over a particular age? You can request it, Jason. It may cost a bit more money when we're talking about bowel, but a prostate screening shouldn't cost any money. And yes, you can request it, particularly if there's a family history.
In fact, I was just talking to someone the other day, the shingle virus, I think you have to pay for after a certain age.
Which virus?
Shingles.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's a I think over, I can't remember, maybe between 55 and you can get it. You can get it free because my husband's telling me he's going to get it free. I mean, okay, good, fill your boots. Because that's something I will say a lot. There's been a big uptick in the number of people getting shingles recently. I don't know if you've seen that, Mark, but there's a post-COVID thing. It seems like the COVID virus is triggering the chickenpox virus and people are getting shingles. So that's a good one to get if you're over 55.
Hey, I'm wondering too, Fiona, how much of an impact do you think COVID had generally on our attitude towards health. Because we're, we had more time to sort of reflect. You're in the middle of you were surrounded. I mean, health, you couldn't escape health, could we? For 2 to 3 years, it was just thrust upon us. I'm just curious as to whether it's had a positive impact in terms of how, well, it's had a negative impact in some areas, but whether it's had a positive impact in terms of how we approach, health and the health system ourselves.
I think it's highlighted some things. It's highlighted some need within the health system, because you were talking about people not being able to get resourcing. That one of the issues around New Zealand is we've got people who can't access healthcare, and I think that it's become a salient topic. So therefore, we start to know those things, and you need it. And we know that in Australia and New Zealand, that's been underfunded health and health systems that are not well supported. That's a problem. So yes, I think COVID has brought that to light. I think that it's brought out some kind of odd opinions around health as well, because there's a lot of misinformation around there. So I think that we're getting a bit of divide around what is real and what isn't real. But in terms of health generally, I think it's helped with mental health. I think that mental health, people who'd never experienced anxiety in the past experienced a level of anxiety during COVID. And what it meant was we could have compassionate conversations. If you've had your own experience of something, it's easier to then deal with it in your immediate environment. And I think I've talked to people around New Zealand and workplaces where that is the case, where you can start to go, I had to manage it myself, I now get it. So I think that's been a positive. I also know that it's been a negative, and that we know that mental health issues post-COVID and our younger people is something that we have to address. But it's also wider than that. Our young people, our Gen Zs that are coming through in the workforce, we know that they're a more anxious and a lonelier generation than ever before. So there are some health things that are new that we have to address. So we've kind of addressed everything.
What's caused that, do you think, for that Gen Z? Why are they the most
anxious? Political changes, climate change, social media, a lot of things feel a bit hopeless and helpless. When I was growing up, I wouldn't have had any clue what was going on in the Ukraine, really. I mean, we did have, tanks at 6 o'clock in the news. We'd watch as a family as they rolled into Lebanon, but that was about the extent of it. Now there's the brain doesn't distinguish between, or the amygdala, which is responsible for fight or flight, doesn't distinguish between something that's happening in our immediate environment and something that's happening on television. And so you will find that kids particularly are in fight or flight when they watch terrible things happening in the world, and then they feel helpless, can't control it. And then there's climate change, so there's a lot of reasons. And then we had lockdowns and pandemics and then loneliness. And it's hard to get sometimes Gen Zs back into the workforce, so, yet they're lonely. So there's a whole lot of things that I think have just culminated in that generation being slightly more anxious, or at least articulating their anxiety. It's hard to say because we didn't used to talk about it, but it feels like this generation are much better at understanding that they're anxious and talking about it.
Yeah, I think you're certainly right on that. I mean, most things that I find the subsequent generations are more free about, or willing to, this is about me.
Yeah. I mean, again, young people always are narcissistic. We were as well, but they're just narcissistic about something else. And also it's true. I think that it does feel a bit hopeless for them, but there are definitely, we can talk about that. I will go on, and we've got 3 minutes left. So Mark, how people can go to your website? What's going on for the rest of this week?
Yeah, menshealthweek.co.nz, and we've got there's all sorts of tips. We did quizzes and things to try to make it, it's not going to work for everyone, but you've got to try and make it more accessible. No one likes to be lectured or whatever, so we try and make it a bit of fun. So we have the quizzes, we have the watch your score, and it's just a great thing you can do just to give yourself a bit of a snapshot of where you're at, and then you can turn around, you can turn that around. So everything is on there. We've even got a lovely article from JK there. Thank you very much.
For that.
AAA battery for anxiety. So again, we like pulling in different people, contributions from the Gut Foundation. We've got an Arthritis Foundation, and various others. We're not trying to say, look, it's our little closed shop. Anyone who can contribute towards men's health, we want to sort of hear from. It's why it's sort of great to be talking to you, Fiona, and sort of and your contribution with it. So the rest of the week, as I say, this is an awareness campaign. So we have various ambassadors. We basically pump them out to the various radio stations. We just try and create as much noise as possible. just to direct people into the website and just to start making those little changes, those small steps that are going to influence their life. So we've done, we've got a big media campaign. We've sort of spent a bit of, you don't get nothing for free, but, NZME been pretty good to us. So we've got a big media campaign. And as I said, we've got all the various, radio stations, especially. Radio stations are great for guys, especially breakfast and drive. Because it's, all the people in their Ford Rangers and Hiluxes and everything, they're the people we need to get to. And especially as people get older. I mean, young guys think they're bulletproof, and there's a certain truth to it. I mean, if you haven't gone to the doctor, I mean, it's a big difference. I think as you get older, you need more of that sort of constant attention. So this week here is just one big push to get as much publicity around it. It's our 1 week. We own this week. We just try and make the most of it. And if we can just even get a few guys making small changes towards better lives, then we've succeeded.
Hooray. Thank you so much for your time, Mark. Good luck for this week. Everyone go out and get your screeners, look after yourselves because we care about you. And you know what? This is how we change the world. Small steps. Go to the menshealthweek.co.nz, take the test. If you're a woman supporting a man, maybe you just drive them to the GP. Go well, everyone. Loads of love. See you again next time. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Fiona.